you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Hello and welcome to Visiting the Village. I'm Paul Kilduff-Taylor, and joining me as ever is the infantile Ian Hardingham.
Hello, Mr. Paul Kilduff-Taylor. I am ready to start now.
It's the top story.
Esports organisation MLG have been bought by Activision for $46 million. Ian Hardingham, what do we think about this acquisition?
This is interesting. I think that the thing that I think most about this is that Activision own rather a lot of the games that people like watching on the internet, and by them also owning the league and quite possibly moving to try and have the ability to negotiate the rights for major competitions involving their games. They're becoming like a much bigger player in this, obviously, and also they're going to have a lot more control than we've seen in other sort of traditional sports, which I think is really interesting. One very minor aspect of this is that, according to this article, one of the things that had caused MLG to be doing worse recently was losing the rights to this big Call of Duty tournament that Activision run themselves, and you've got to believe that when that's next up, the rights for that are next up, they are going to go back to MLG. So that's a really great example of how Blizzard are going to have control, possibly a bit more control than we should be happy about.
Yeah, this is a weird one for me. There's a variety of things going on here. One of the things that's going on is that the major esports tournaments that people watch now are not run by MLG. The other is that MLG has been running at a loss for a really long time and has substantial debt. And finally, the other thing is, as you say, Activision own a lot of these games. They own Call of Duty, they own all the Blizzard stuff that people watch during these tournaments. So if you put all of that together, it seems like a bit of a weird acquisition to me in terms of what it's going to do for MLG and what it's going to do for esports. For them, obviously, it makes sense. $46 million is not a gigantic amount of money for them. It does give them access to a lot of people who want to watch games. MLG needs a shake-up. It's been suffering for a while. So that's okay. It's just, I don't know, sort of as a fan, what I should feel about this, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest concern is that Blizzard are only going to allow MLG to run Blizzard games. I mean, and what's probably going to happen is not something that extreme.
Yeah.
But they're definitely going to get favourable treatment. The Call of Duties and the StarCrafts and the Hearthstones are going to get a lot better treatment than the Counter-Strikes, which is generally a bad thing. Activision have said here that this is part of their plan to create the ESPN of esports.
Okay.
Which is always a great quote.
Yeah.
I want to make the ESPN of everything. I don't know. Like, I'm really projecting here. Projecting because I have no data. But I just kind of don't think Blizzard are going to do... Sorry, Activision are going to do what it takes to make this into, like, the next level of spectator sports stuff. I know there's a bit of a complicated aspect to this because obviously MLG are running the events and selling the rights, but they're not ESPN. They're not actually the broadcaster, right? Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Yes, they are the broadcaster, effectively.
They're broadcaster as well.
Yes.
So do they broadcast via Twitch, but they count as the broadcaster?
They tried to have their own streaming service for a really long time. I don't know if they still do.
Right. It'd probably take me at least several months to work out how that sort of differs from the existing concepts of sport viewership on TV, etc.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to try and do that now. Anyway, I think that it requires a huge amount of innovation and money to make this happen, and a lot of attention. And it feels like the kind of thing that a company as big as Activision Blizzard just won't do in the way that it needs to be done. I don't think this has matured to the point where just throwing billions of dollars at it is the answer. I feel like a space has to mature to a certain extent before that's the right move.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that it's there yet, is probably my call on this.
This is just, to me, symptomatic of esports' very difficult, I suppose you'd say young adulthood. I think we've probably had the teenage of esports. I think esports are definitely an established thing that exists that has a degree of maturity to it now as a market, as an industry, early maturity. And this, to me, it feels like a step backwards. A games publisher owning this league and all of the major viewing things being directly owned by the company. You've got Worlds, you've got the Dota International. They're all owned by Riot and Valve, the individual companies. That feels unhealthy to me. And also this ESPN of esports thing that's probably the worst thing they could have said. To rehash one of the worst cliches about how you should approach growing esports is something that not only is going to annoy the community infinitely, but to me represents the fact that I don't think they're going into this with the right idea.
Yeah, I think it speaks to a certain naivety, and I think I basically echo your statements, that it is a step backwards for all the reasons that you said. I still feel that pro gaming has got to show that it can be profitable outside some very specific areas where it's sponsored either by a game, the company that owns the game, or by some quite sort of specific other companies, such as hardware companies. I'd really like to see a company be profitable on its own feet in a wider way. And this feels in some ways like well, not the opposite per se, but this is once again a company with a lot of vested interest in the specific content, paying for the content, rather than it kind of being supported just by how popular it is.
Sure.
I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think we need to have something that extracts it from where it is now, that really takes it in a new direction, and this is just sort of anchoring it to where it is now. What we might do is end up with an interesting situation where the companies running these games are kind of competing on broadcasting, and you've certainly seen that with Valve. Like, Valve have responded to the size and scope and professionalism of the broadcasting of their competitors and sort of responded that way. Activision might want to do the same thing with MLG. So you might be in this weird situation where it actually causes these games companies to transition out of being traditional games companies. You could argue that's already happened. So maybe instead of esports sort of as an industry changing, it will change games more.
Yeah, I still think it's really untraveled terrain in a lot of ways. I was thinking about Riot, makers of League of Legends, when you were saying that, and they almost feel like they're kind of, so much of what they do day to day is about pro gaming and the viewership. And of course, also they patch their game and they maintain their game and they create new games and everything. But it feels like, you only have to get one amazingly successful game, and suddenly you're making so much money from that game that everything about your business changes. Yeah. And you look at how Valve responds to that. You look at how Blizzard responds to that. Everyone responds to that in a very different way. Even the guys who make Angry Birds, again, like, everyone has a different thing that they do when they get so much money to do with one or a couple of IPs, and how they want to grow their business and kind of in some ways just like rise out of just being a games company. So I think that's interesting. I still find it very disorienting to try and work out what this scene is like compared to normal sports, because no one owns tennis and football, so you don't really have that concern about the is it the same? FIFA and the NFL, they have the ability to change the rules. Obviously that's the same as a game developer. They control all of the major events, so maybe that's somewhat similar. It just feels like it's kind of untrodden territory, and it's like I feel completely lost until it's big enough that one of the major sports channels, like until Sky Sports actually start putting it on properly, or the ESPN start putting something on every Tuesday night, and I can look at that and then I can start comparing it. but maybe, you know, it's always just going to be a completely different market.
I feel like it is going to be completely different. I don't feel like it's going to be something that is there in the same place as mainstream sport until games radically change. Until we have a new generation of games that look different from traditional sort of desktop-based games. I don't feel that that's ever going to be the place where it goes, even though the behaviours and some of the community stuff is similar to mainstream sports. I always feel like the comparison is not that effective, and I feel like esports in general just needs to stop referencing and comparing itself to normal mainstream sports.
Is there anything else that's a more effective comparison?
I think you've talked about poker in the past, and I actually think that's kind of closer to what esports are like than a real sport. So perhaps that's a more useful comparison.
Yeah, I definitely think that's kind of the closest I can think of. You know, for me, still the major problem, and maybe I'm being just too old-fashioned with this, but it's about not being able to see the contestants' faces in the right way. I know, obviously, that pro gaming casts try and do that as much as possible, but there's still such a big disconnect between where the action is and where the reaction is. I think causes some problems, and that's the kind of thing that poker had to deal with to a small extent, and they showed you the cards, you know, on screen with the players' faces, and it kind of shows you what was important there, much more to see the player's face and have the cards in sort of a small view. But, like, I still don't know if that's really old-fashioned. I mean, you know, people watch Wimbledon in England who aren't tennis fans, and I kind of would love there to be something in the future where everyone watches the massive yearly StarCraft tournament, even people who really never watch pro gaming at any other setting. Like, that's something that feels like it could be achievable.
Yeah, I mean, the flip side of that to me is that I think it's probably more reflective of the fact that we can now make these niches commercial because of streaming, rather than the niches are going to get bigger and embrace everyone. It feels like it just represents how media can be stratified so that the thing that you like is presented in the same way as something everyone likes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess the only thing, again, is that I'm just not sure the way in which pro gaming is self-sufficient right now. I mean, there's always going to be money from games companies looking to promote their games. So it's not like the amount of money out there to pay for streaming people playing games is going to decrease. It's going to increase. What does it follow? Does it always follow these? It feels like we've got some core games right now with StarCraft 2, League of Legends, I guess Dota 2, Counter-Strike. I guess those are the top ones. You know, how long are they going to last? Like, how long are they going to keep selling? Is there going to be competitors that have an impact? Are we going to be watching Counter-Strike in 15 years?
I mean, I feel like they've defined something that will always be popular in very broad terms, so I think we'll always be watching some kind of competitive FPS wherever that genre goes, and probably some kind of competitive real-time strategy game wherever that genre goes. I mean, I don't know if we'll be watching StarCraft 2 and Counter-Strike in 15 years, but I think we'll be watching their equivalents, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, just talking about myself, and I guess I suppose I'm an unusual pro gaming watcher in some ways because I don't watch very much of it, so I'm different to you. I love having sport on in the background. I find it very relaxing, but you know, for me it has to have a certain level of production values and not like half an hour massive delays where nothing happens. So I'm not that far off wanting to watch a channel that just had a lot of pro gaming on.
Yeah,
I mean, that would just be really awesome for me, even though I've got all these questions about how good spectator sports these things really are. I'd still put on StarCraft 2 on my TV if it was like a Tuesday night and there was nothing else on of the couple of leagues that I like much more. I'd still prefer that than watching like a random TV channel. So I kind of really want to watch that happen. But again, whenever I talk about putting something on a TV channel, I'm aware of just how incredibly dinosaur that sounds.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that the access to where this is coming from is going to improve rather than it moving over to being on the old system. Definitely. Like, I think you're...
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are advantages to TVs that need to be reflected.
Yeah.
I want to, with one click, be taking to this channel.
Yeah.
And I don't want the really annoying choices that I'm faced with whenever I go to Twitch. But obviously that can be done.
Yeah. That's inevitable to me.
I hope it does happen.
Yeah, because that's how you leverage all of this new stuff that's being made. If you're the company that is controlling the online services for TV, or what you want it to be one button, the StarCraft button needs to be there. Like, it's just so obvious, and it's actually amazing to me still how long that's taken to happen now. Like, it's amazing.
I don't really understand why Twitch just doesn't hire a bunch of people to be in a studio at all times and just have an incredibly curated 24-hour channel. Which sort of switches out of events when they get boring.
Right, it's going that way. That's taken a really long time, and the technology's taken a really long time. I still don't understand why that is. I think it's difficult to produce that amount of content still in some ways, but equally, yeah, the problem is that the events, the broadcasting's still based around one game, so there isn't enough content to fill those gaps just for one game. Even if you have a reporter who's talking to the players, if you have a host, if you have pre-recorded stuff to go in those gaps, with a big event, that's still not enough time. So you do that and you show adverts, and then you're going to have a bit of downtime. But that's generally decreasing. And yeah, this thing of unifying the different audiences is very, very stubbornly refusing to happen. And there's still, I think the reason behind that is still this stratification of the content. It's going to be difficult to find a general thing that works.
It's interesting to me that we've obviously got what I would call a surfeit of people who are willing to talk over video on YouTube.
Yeah.
Because the way these things work, though, they're not allowed to just talk over live streams of events.
Yeah.
Because the first thing that an events company stops you doing is your own commentated broadcast of their event. I would love it if there was all of the major Twitch sort of channels had a couple of YouTubers who spent a lot of time just commentating it all day.
Yeah.
And I could just have that instead, because I still have the experience of coming onto Twitch, wanting to watch some pro gaming and just being like, okay, I have no idea where to click. Whatever I click, this one's in German, this one doesn't have any commentary, this one's nothing happens for the next 15 minutes. It's still a bad experience that feels like, some common sense could lead it to going a lot better for me. I know you're right, it is going to happen, it's just taking too long.
Yeah, and the weird thing is that people do that, they will restream, and now Twitch has this thing where you host other channels. So if you're watching a channel and that person logs off their stream, they will host someone else. You can get a more continuous experience now. But yeah, it's just taking a really long time to do. And this meta thing that everyone seems to want, be it the Good Studio, which was a show where they did do multiple sports and they sort of had this comedic roundtable format, which is a little bit similar to some of the ESPN stuff, but a lot more sort of lax and casual. That was good, but it wasn't sustainable for them to do that. This ESPN thing, this Sports Center thing has never worked, and it seems like it won't ever work. So this is still a funny area.
I mean, that's such a terrible thing to... Well, not such a bad thing to try, but that's the arena that you're going to have most resistance to, because a lot of people watching Sports Center at midnight just think it's absolutely ludicrous and are offended by this new thing that they don't understand. And it's not, a news item or highlight on Sports Center is less of a sort of wedge in the door than I think people are hoping. You've got to show live events. You've got to have the experience that we had turning on late night poker, being completely bemused and then completely hooked by this weird new sport. We've talked about this for 19 minutes, Mr. Paul Kilduff Taylor, and we still haven't discussed the poor minority investor in MLG.
Yes.
Who said to the Observer, "I got fucked on stock."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people feel like this. I did feel like the valuation was quite low, but then MLG has always been about looking like it's more successful than it is, quite frankly. I mean, Sundance Di Giovanni, who has one of the best names in gaming, has always been a guy that has been sort of at the marketing forefront of MLG, making it look like this big, sort of powerful organization when it's struggled for a really long time to make money. So on one level, I think that, yeah, if you're a shareholder, you're probably not happy with that buyout, especially, you know, I don't know exactly the details of this guy. I don't know what class of shares he had or anything. Like, I'm sure that there are pissed off people right now.
Yeah, well, we better move on, otherwise we won't be able to get to
anything.
The millions of other interesting things we have to talk about today.
An article by Tim Edwards for PC Gamer about the hacking in Watch Dogs and how to fix it is, to me, indicative of a trend of journalists talking about how to fix games. One interesting example was Marsh Davies on Rock Paper Shotgun talking about how to fix COD Blops 3, where he made some sort of direct gameplay suggestions. What do you think about this trend?
Well, I mean, I think that I'm very happy with it. I mean, I don't know, you know, like, a lot of the time when a journalist writes an entire article about a change they'd like to see in a game, it's usually quite a major one, and maybe not that useful to the developers.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes it's actually, in a nice way, sort of games journalism at its most naive. When I read a lot of these things, I tend to be fairly dubious. You know, whenever you look at a different game and you're not, like, either A, talking about making a very small change, or B, such an experienced game designer that you can kind of really get into it, you tend to be wrong about the things that you think could be changed.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not talking about fixing bugs or like little game mode changes. In this Tim Edwards article, he talks about how he'd love to see, instead of in Watch Dogs hacking a bridge to be fully open, this is a bridge that opens to let boats through, or closed, he'd love to see you be able to do like granular versions, so you could open it by 10% or 5%, because, you know, he says very compellingly that you could then make your own ramps, etc. And I think that's a really cool idea. I don't have a problem with it, and I think his idea of a hacking game which gives you much more control of your environment is a perfectly fine one. But then, like, trying to find the balance of what's fun in terms of how much control a player has in the game is, like, such a huge part of the iteration and design of the game.
Yeah.
That I think just assuming that the designers didn't try that isn't necessarily the right approach. So I'm in favour of it. Of course, it's just a new, different kind of talking about game design, I guess. Yeah,
I mean, I think I'm probably a little bit more negative on it than you are, mostly for the reasons that you've stated. I mean, I think it might come across as patronising to say that sort of almost every time these suggestions are made, journalists are basically talking about making another different game when they think they're talking about changing an existing one in a sort of subtle way or something. But that tends to almost always be the case. I think something that's interesting to look at is Tom Francis. Obviously, he started off as a journalist, and he wrote blog posts all about designing his games and sort of the journey that he had to go on from being a journalist to learning how to be a designer. And I think the process that he goes through is really indicative of the gulf between what you think is an interesting change to a game and what designing a game is actually like. Now, I think I kind of want journalists to be more authoritative than this, and perhaps that's not something that you really care about.
Yeah, it's just I guess I don't know necessarily what that would look like. I mean, if they're too authoritative, then it will feel really patronising, I guess. I mean, you know, if someone suggests that Frozen Synapse should have X, Y, Z in it, you know, it's often an implicit criticism, or it's almost always an implicit criticism. And that's okay. That can be annoying, but hearing good feedback is fine. I completely agree with you that the worst kind of feedback is. I think we always used to say this, maybe about determinants, that it's like people just were like, well, why wasn't this an JRPG set underwater?
Yeah.
Like, people just, if they don't like your game, they just take whatever the most inspiring thing about it is to them, and then design their own game based around that. Which is fine. I mean, you have to kind of learn as a game developer to ignore that kind of stuff. I guess I'm slightly different. I actually am happy to see games journalists be a bit more out there. Like, this actually feels more confident.
Sure.
Than a lot of the stuff I've seen recently. I feel like in the olden days there was a lot more kind of bluster and antagonism from games journalism.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that as a consumer.
I think maybe the only thing I want is for this just to be framed as, hey, here is an idea for a different mechanic I had based on this game, not here is how to fix X game. That's the thing that bothers me about it. It's like, it would be better if they just did this, when that in almost every single one of these cases is not only probably untrue, but also, not the process by which things happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. Again, it's something nice though about like a review or something, not just saying this is bad, but then suggesting a really crazy solution.
It's better than this. It's better than this is bad.
Something nice about that.
Yeah. Ostensibly equine-oriented meta-catastrophe game Pony Island came out recently. Its name perhaps does not indicate its content perfectly well. You should look at it. Now, is this fourth wall breaking a current trend, or is it something that's going to persist?
Well, I think this is a great example of that there's a lot of like juice in the orange right now. I think it's relatively easy to come up with surprisingly subversive fourth wall breaking games right now.
Yeah.
Certainly playing the beginner's guide, and there's a bit in it where he kind of basically shows you a lot of the ideas he had for silly stuff that he didn't end up using. And each one of them was pretty good.
Yeah.
And I just think that this is new right now.
Yeah.
And that we're going to be completely swimming in it in 18 months. And it'll be almost impossible to make something that is surprising at that point.
Yes.
Or what's surprising will be very different, and then we can call that a trend. So that's kind of where I see this going.
Yeah. I think we're kind of at the beginning of people understanding how word of mouth works. Like, if you look at Undertale, there's a lot of stuff in there which sort of implies that people are going to be talking about it. Stuff like the multiple endings at the simplest level, if there wasn't internet forum culture, it would be almost completely pointless putting in hidden stuff to that extent, because nobody would ever find it. But if you come from a point of view where people are going to start finding things quickly, then you want to put in all these Byzantine levels of different hidden stuff, so it takes people a while to find them. It's a kind of relationship of the market to creation. Yeah, I think we agree on this. I feel like this is just going to get worse, I suppose you could say, over time, very rapidly, and then it is going to saturate quite quickly.
Yeah, exactly. I'd like to see... I still was inspired by The Beginner's Guide more than I really, really liked The Beginner's Guide, and I would like to see something that's really subversive. There's a small part of this in John Walker's review of this. There's apparently a bit of a hacking thing in here, and I think he called it a pandemic of hacking related games, games that allow you to sort of get behind how the sausage is made, he called it. And I find that interesting, actually. I first sort of vaguely on paper designed a game about programming like sort of 10 or 15 years ago or something, and there's something very compelling about it because not only are programmers making games and obviously obsessed with programming, but there's something very gamey about programming, and it's interesting that John Walker thinks it's just reached insane sort of saturation levels to a certain point, and I kind of agree with that. I definitely feel like a lot of the stuff that's coming out in regards to that is a bit boring at the moment, and it's a bit like what we were just saying about Tim Edwards' idea for Watch Dogs, trying to work out, trying to just take an existing game and then adding more ways for the player to kind of change the environment or sort of screw with it. That's really like a double-edged sword there. That's fun to start with, and then you realise that what you really want is a game like Minecraft or something, like a new game like that, which allows you to interact with the world in a completely new way that's also massively well-designed, well-iterated, well-polished, and that's what people really want. So. Game
developers Kuju Entertainment and Curve Digital have merged with the intent to become the next major British games publisher. Should we have mega indie publishers? Is this going back to the bad old days?
Yeah, I was actually slightly wondering if this was the start of the consolidation of the industry. You and I had a little Mode 7 meeting a couple of days ago, and we talked about advertising budgets for games. And of course, as we see more and more games come out, it's harder and harder to be heard. We go back to marketing budgets being very important. Now, we're not going to go back to needing to put a game in a box and put that box in a truck and take that truck to a shop that exists in real life. All of that's a very expensive thing that people couldn't do and required big publishers to do for you. But we might go back to the days where you need big marketing spends to guarantee a mid-level budget, or even like a small-level budget, I guess. And that, for me, is going to imply that publishers are going to rise in importance again, which I know is already happening, but that's kind of what I felt while reading this.
Yeah, and people are going to get more attracted to them whether or not they're actually delivering that value. So I do think there's quite a lot of scope for something like this. I mean, Curve have really shown themselves to be doing this stuff well. Kuju have been sort of in the background behind loads of different stuff for the last few years. It seems like a good idea for them to do it. I don't know if this is going to have a negative effect. I think people will still be chasing the outlier success, even, no matter how saturated the market is. And I feel like they'll do that without a publisher. But I'll be interested to see what they do, because I think the publishers that are successful in this period of time tend to have quite a good, solid identity and remit. And if this, for example, changed the identity that Curve have established, then that might not necessarily be a good thing.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think that the most important thing is that when these companies get big and successful and established, so like Paradox, and I guess like this new combination of Kuju and Curve, do they start going to in-house development teams?
Yeah.
Because that really is the slippery slope. Like, that's like a direct train to mega publisherdom again. If that's like the automatic thing you want to do, you're really profitable, you think you know what the equation is to make profitable games, which I bet Paradox think they do.
Yes.
And the next thing you go is, well, these pesky developers are charging us too much.
Yeah.
Think about how much more money we could make if we were doing it in-house.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that I'll watch with most interest, because if that starts happening, a lot of these publishers right now, like Curve, like Devolver, they're kind of porting houses. That's kind of where a lot of this stuff comes from. So they've got a bunch of engineers who are great at porting and doing all of the other things that indie developers don't want to do. That's been the business model. I have my suspicions that, like, as success and hubris and consolidation come in, they're going to get away from that again. That's kind of just my suspicion.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, Paradox already sort of do that. And I just think that's inevitable. If you have access to, even for a short period of time, if you know what the market's doing better than someone else, whether that's by luck or judgment, then the rational thing to do is to do some in-house development. So I do think we'll see that. And also, consolidation is a normal response to saturation, because fewer things do very well, and the people that manage to repeat that success get into a position of power very quickly. So yeah, I mean, I think we agree on this trajectory.
Yeah, let's keep an eye on this and see what keeps happening, because I think the next 2 years are going to be really telling of whether we're in like a big cyclical thing or whether something different is going to happen.
According to a survey by Tiger, over 50% of UK games companies are looking to expand in some way in 2016. It appears that most companies are expecting to be able to increase their workforce and see increased revenue and profits in the upcoming year. What do we think about the expansion of the games industry?
Yeah, so in this article they talk about the main factor just being the meteoric rise of mobile gaming. I think that in terms of other things that are causing general growth in the market, we talk about them all the time, but I want to get back to slightly basics here. It still seems to me that a lot of new customers in second and third world countries now have access to connected devices, can buy games from companies in the UK. I was kind of interested by, just the headline stat here: over 50% of UK games companies are looking to expand in some way in 2016. Doesn't seem like a particularly strong statement to me, I guess. I mean, I guess it means we're not in recession. How do you read that stat line?
I mean, I just read it as Tiger finding something positive to say about the UK games industry. Like, it's a survey with a soft question that says, are you thinking about doing anything else? And then people say, yes, we are. And then they can go, look at this trend in the games industry, which is good for their position. So that's what it means to me. The integrity of that as a stat is not really relevant.
Yeah, exactly. And basically every single other one of these stats are like that.
Yeah.
And the one that most amused me was 56% of respondents anticipate their company's costs are likely to increase.
Yeah.
So broadly half of the companies think their costs are likely to increase.
Yeah.
I just think that's kind of... it doesn't say very much, but I suppose that... do you think it's a good time to be a medium-sized games company?
It depends what you're doing.
In England?
Yeah, in England. It depends what you're doing. I mean, it depends what you use your medium size for. If your medium size is about being sort of intelligently experimental and perhaps finding out different niches that you can work in, and you're good at that, then yes. If you're a medium-sized company and you're working on a single product in an untested area because you think it's a good idea and you have a little bit of funding, then I would suggest that's extremely hard position and you have to be very lucky.
Yeah, so I'm just struggling to find things about this press release that aren't just like every other press release they put out.
Well, look, the point of this is I think we're approaching this from the wrong way. What they want to do is continually stress how dynamic and good and interesting and profitable the UK games industry is. And it looks like that some people are paying attention to this now when they put out these positive press releases. So this is a good move by Tiger. It's the kind of thing that they should be doing. So that in itself is interesting, that games have started to get more respect as an industry in the UK. We've got tax breaks. We've got games considered as culture more. We've got cultural games events that are in part occasionally state funded. We've got people like Surrey and Livingston who are getting knighthoods and things like that. So we're in a time where games are respected as a commercial industry and as a cultural form in a way they've never been before.
Well, that's good to hear. Good work, Tiger.
Well done, Tiger. Oh, here we go. The Oculus Rift is now available to pre-order. Apparently the device will cost $599. £499 in the UK, and producer Jimmy would like to stress that's not a direct currency conversion. It includes some kind of VR remote control as well as an Xbox One controller. We have a bonus funny quote from Palmer Luckey back in 2013, which is, quote, "If something's even $600, it doesn't matter how good it is, how great of an experience it is. If they just can't afford it, then it really might as well not exist." That's an amazing quote. Is it too much?
I think it is too much. Now, just to be clear, you do need a computer as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's too much. So I don't know where we go from here, because I can't believe that the PlayStation VR is going to be that much. I can't believe the Steam's VR is going to be that much. So what are Oculus Rift doing?
I think that I have always said that I think this consumer generation of Oculus in particular is not going to be it. It's not going to be meaningful. The only thing that can happen now that's good for them is that this device is amazingly good and the people who have it absolutely love it, and then they can figure out a way of making it cheaper. I think that must be what they're banking on, because it is not marketable at that price.
Yeah, and I'm interested if Facebook, which famously bought Oculus a year and a half or so ago, what does this say about that?
Yeah. At
the time, there was, for me, a valid concern that when a big company buys a small company doing something exciting, in some ways this is like the Blizzard thing. You feel like you're losing a ceiling of real entrepreneurship and like real scrappiness, and just like I feel like if the people in charge have all this money but they don't have the vision, they may well just not make the kind of really bold calls that you sometimes need to get there. So I guess Facebook just said, well, this costs $450 to make. That's a thing that you sell for $599. We're really happy that you're so popular so far, and it's sold out in pre-order, which is not in any way surprising. So maybe Facebook just don't see anything wrong with charging them out of money, and they won't until they see their competitors come out. Do you think Oculus Rift is likely to be better than Steam's VR and PlayStation's VR.
I feel like there is a chance. It's so difficult to tell right now because I still haven't used the Valve one or indeed the PlayStation one. The Valve one, everyone who uses it says it's much better than Oculus.
Yeah.
And yeah, it has a lot more technical constraints. But I think because it's Valve, they're going to be working on those technical constraints for a long time. It's really interesting. This is a new thing. There's no VHS and Betamax here. All of the different ones have very different advantages and very different problems. And I felt like Oculus was going to work at the scale of being a good product for nerds who wanted to get a good VR experience early. So a high price for that would make sense. If they were trying to make it a mass consumer item at a low price, that would have been a mistake as well. But they've gone so far in that direction, they're banking on it being so exciting, when there is a more technically exciting alternative out there. That seems very, very risky to me.
I mean, maybe Oculus just can't be a mainstream device right now because I just don't think it can be. I mean, I think that PlayStation's VR can make it a mainstream device as an add-on to the PlayStation.
Yes.
Sort of not really, in a lot of ways, on its own merits, but because it is a exciting new piece of technology that they can sell to a lot of people who already have PlayStation. So, maybe Oculus just understands maybe that they're not going to sell this to Jim and Bob's parents, whatever, who just go into a store at Christmas and see it. Like, maybe they understand it's not ready for that yet, so they might as well make a profit on it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I guess the thing about this I find most interesting is the Facebook takeover thing. It just, for me, and maybe this is completely false, it feels so much less likely they're going to win now. Like, it feels like when Oculus was a company with Carmack involved and a lot of VC and presumably some very intelligent people at the top who were very invested in making it work, it felt like there's higher ceiling to that winning against two pretty big hitters in Steam and PlayStation, Sony, and now I kind of think it doesn't. And maybe that's just completely wrong. I don't know. Yeah,
again, I'm not sure of the management relationship that they have with Oculus. I mean, this could well have just been all from Oculus.
Sure. I mean, and are Facebook going to push it, to their to their little website thing? Like, are they gonna?
Yeah,
because the idea was that this was a speculative purchase on Facebook's part. For the future, where you wanted to use VR to feel like you were in the same room as someone else.
Yeah.
And is this a point on that journey?
I mean, again,
it's a long journey.
I think they're aiming for this. They're aiming for this thing where they get it into the niche core audience. They make money out of that first, and then they work out how to make it cheaper. But I just think it fails on every count there, because this is very much a niche PC product, but it's outmatched by the thing that those people care about in that category, by the Valve one.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, if your end thing is that you want people with money and who use Facebook to have one, you probably don't want to have a medium stage where it's profitable. I totally agree with what you're saying for the path of it being, see if we can get enough people at this price point and then spend money to make it cheaper. But if Facebook really want to really make the VR revolution, they're probably better off spending a lot of their money kind of having like an insanely low priced or sort of specific functionality thing. But yeah, I guess I'm just sort of making random ideas now, random words.
There is probably a low chance still, despite our ranting, of this being so good in this version that people start buying it at 500 quid and they're like, oh my god, you have to get this. Like this is the thing that's going to change everything. And that's personally, although we can buy this through our company as an expense, it's too expensive for me to do that right now. I don't feel like I could justify it. So even though it's an easier purchase for me than it would be for many other people, I don't feel it's justified. But if everyone starts telling me that this is fantastic and that I need one, I'll probably crack. So that could still happen. I think it's unlikely, but it could still happen.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting war. I mean, it's like a mini console war with a completely new kind of technology.
Yeah.
And I still basically think it's not going to be there yet. And PlayStation's VR will be a bit like Kinect, which is massively commercially successful, by the way. And Steam's thing will be like the Steam controller, which is really good and really exciting to people like me who like playing on PC and stuff, but kind of not breaking ground on new market segments.
Yeah.
And who knows what Oculus will be like. I still don't view the experience as essential, but I'm looking forward to seeing when it is.
Richard Moss has published a list of 7 examples of procedural generation in games that he believes all developers should study. Among the examples are the Nemesis system from Shadow of Mordor, the level generation from Spelunky, and the way in which Dwarf Fortress's many relatively simple systems can combine and interact. I really like this. It's one of the best sort of roundup things I've seen on Gamasutra for a long time. You should read it. What do you think about this?
Yeah, we talk about procedural generation all the time, and I was reticent to put another article in the podcast so soon, but I was interested that this was really not about what people usually talk about with procedural generation. It was much higher level, and it talks about the much broader features that you can get. So the very first thing they talk about is how Crusader Kings 2's sort of weird family tree are so exciting because of the generative personalities of the characters in that game. And even though at the core these characters are really not very complicated, they have, just quoting from the article here, they're under the surface, they're simple numbers like +1 intrigue and -10 greed. That sounds like my character stat sheet. Even though it's really kind of straightforward, when you start layering everything together and you start allowing the player to put a narrative, and you basically put a random face on this thing, it can be really exciting. So I don't think many people would have gone to that when they started thinking about generative content, but it's definitely really valid there. So that's really good. They brought up the system in Shadow of Mordor, where anyone who kills you basically becomes legendary for having killed you, and you face off against them later as your son or your ghost or whatever this thing works. I think this is a bit of a reach in some ways. It talks about procedurally generating post-fight scars. For me, there's a difference between stuff that's generated via the player's actions like that and kind of procedural generation. What do you think about that? Yeah,
I agree. I mean, the extent to which something is a direct impact on the world or on the play, it matters much more to me than like, it generated some names of some planets or whatever. Like, if procedural generation sort of as a background feature, to me, is not really that interesting because it's so self-contained. Shadow of Mordor, I haven't really experienced this Nemesis system. I've watched some videos of the game. I'm now sort of a little bit sick of people talking about it. It seems like something that might be the start of something interesting, but functionally is just, again, flavour for a sort of open world type thing. I mean, yes, we've talked about this subject a huge amount. This kind of article is good in that it will spur people to think of original things to do with procedural generation as opposed to just moving blocks around in a level. So I think this is kind of along the lines of what we've been talking about. There are all these possibilities for it that need exploration.
Yeah, sometimes it's nice to just talk about the very highest level concepts, like the fact that procedural generation making a new level every time means that it's exciting for players every time they start the game.
Yeah.
And that's like basically kind of taken for granted in any conversation we have about it, but it's kind of useful to remember that that's kind of what we're here for. It's allowing you to make a load of content very cheaply, and it's sort of allowing the game to sort of design stuff for you. It's something else they talk about here is kind of a game that has this massively sort of foreboding alien universe that can only come through because procedural generation allows them to make something so big as to feel very lonely.
Yeah.
And that's kind of interesting. That's kind of like a little sort of specific point rather than a broad point. And they have like one thing for Spelunky, which talks about the kind of thing which I spend an awful lot of time thinking about, in terms of generalizing gameplay to the point where you don't have to have Jonathan Blow designing your puzzles. You can have Spelunky's level generator designing your puzzles. So yeah, I don't want to get too bogged down in this or anything, but it's never far from my mind, procedural generation.
Yes, the idea of generalizing something as sort of supposedly creative as gameplay. I mean, we talk about generalizing a level, but that's exactly what Spelunky does. It generalizes the way in which puzzles and little sort of sections emerge in terms of gameplay, and that also is a good way of thinking about procedural generation rather than just the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, exactly.
Adam Smith wrote about NPC schedules in games for Rock Paper Shotgun earlier this week, and the profound impact they can have on a virtual world's believability. Now, this was very interesting for me. It kind of related back a little bit to the thing we were talking about earlier with journalists fixing games. The extent to which journalists are fixated on the impact of their actions doing things and the worlds that they inhabit being consistent never ceases to amaze me as a set of priorities. What do you think?
Yeah, this actually reminds me of something we've talked about, which is the more agency NPCs have, the harder it is to make the game work.
Yes.
Because players, and me, I certainly count myself as one of these, players want their Elder Scrolls world to be full of basically sentient things to interact with. You go around doing extremely interesting things. But that's so often so at odds with the player experience.
Yeah.
And, and there's kind of the way in which that's sort of stratified into MMO versus single player. And yet, no matter the fact that I understand that, I'm always much more excited whenever I find an NPC doing something weird. I really feel like I understand Elder Scrolls' techniques now. Again, I've said that in the past. So that when... It's a lot less exciting because I know how everything works. The game we're working on right now has... the idea of getting a lot of skirmish AIs that can do exactly the same things as the players can, and when you can make that work, that's awesome. When I think about the opposing factions in Alpha Centauri and how they could do everything and how funny it was to see them trying to do something and it failing, and Magic Carpet's so based around the kind of the human-like other people doing exactly the same thing as you. It's so amazing when it works. It's not done very often. I'm excited to be making a game that heavily, prominently features it. And for me, that's what this is about. I mean, like, the first time we heard that Morrowind was going to have, or possibly Oblivion, and this never really ended up happening, was going to have schedules, and the NPCs would go to bed, they'd go to the shops. That just sounded like the best thing ever. And now we're old and jaded and we understand it, so it's not exciting anymore. But it's important to remember just how amazing that sounded at the time. I
know. So I think outside of that, my brain. Oblivion. Outside of Oblivion, which is a very appropriate word to forget, the schedules there where someone would do something weird and you'd catch them at it. That's kind of my favourite schedule thing, is where following someone is a good idea if they appear to be doing a weird schedule. That's exciting. And also in Civ, which I never really played Alpha Centauri, but Civ was my version of that, Civ 2, seeing the funny things that your opponents would be doing, or just the weird stuff, like one country just being stuck on an island for no real reason, and clearly they'd had some economic problem, and you would come into that, the result of an emergent process. Beyond those things, for me, this is done well so rarely and badly so often. I remember Beneath the Steel Sky as one of the first things that said it was going to have NPC schedules. And because that's a point-and-click adventure game, that just meant there's a probability of a person not being in the place you want them to be.
The concept is kind of literally just against what the genre needs.
Right.
And it sounds amazing because, again, like, when you play adventure games, point-and-click adventure games... the thing they do most effectively, which again is bizarre because it's the thing they're doing least, is creating like an interactive space that's much more sort of fully interactive than you're used to seeing, because you're basically able to talk to a lot of different people and move things along. Like, it's nothing like the most reactive, like Half-Life 2 level or something, has nothing on the little environment from Grim Fandango at the beginning, because it doesn't have to be fully modelled. It kind of obfuscates from you what the rules are, and it makes you feel like you're living in the world. That's what's so amazing about this game for me, and kind of why I want to see that be done better, which it hasn't been recently. But you're absolutely right. Sorry to completely butt in, but it's so weird that the mechanics require you to go and find this person, and the fact that they might be anywhere is not part of the gameplay.
Indeed. Now, I believe you're somewhat pushed for time, are you not?
I am a little pushed for time. I should probably head off relatively soon.
Alright, so I think we should talk about 2016's forthcoming games.
Okay.
So Eurogamer have published a list of their 50 most anticipated games of 2016. Now, this is quite an extensive list. I'm going to just have a look through here. We've got The Witness, we've got XCOM 2, Firewatch, which looks really interesting, Street Fighter 5, a lot of indie stuff and a lot of AAA stuff. Is there anything on this list that particularly strikes you?
Well, I'm just reading it for the first time now, I'm afraid. But am I being struck by anything? A lot of sequels, obviously. Doom's on here.
Yes.
Oh yeah, they're re-releasing Doom. The new Doom looks a lot like Quake. Looks a lot like Doom 3. Yep. Sea of Thieves. I bet that's not a Thief IP game. Off-World Trading Company is already out in beta,
yep.
and that's supposed to be quite good. What does this look like to me? I mean, I don't know if I've ever looked at a top 50 upcoming games list and been excited by it particularly. It's especially on something like Eurogame, where a lot of them are console stuff. The stuff that I tend to really look forward to is not in the top 50, shall we say? I don't know what this is saying to me about the industry or anything. It doesn't look bad. A lot of this stuff's relatively exciting. Star Fox Zero.
Yep.
What do you think about this?
I think the standouts for me, unsurprisingly, are the indie stuff. And, when we started out in indie games, I didn't really play that many other indie games. And they're rapidly becoming the things that I gravitate to instantly. So on here, there's Firewatch, which I'm very interested to check out, mostly from a sort of hype potential. I don't really know how they're going to make that idea work. I want to see if they do. There's Hyper Light Drifter, which I'm extremely excited about. I think looks amazing. There's Super Hot, which we've talked about before and is amazing. There's No Man's Sky, of course, the most controversial game of the last 50 years. So all of those things, to me, I felt the same way as you when I started looking at that list. It's like, oh yeah, Uncharted, blah blah, Final Fantasy, blah blah, and then you think, well, actually, a few of these indie games are going to be incredible, and they're just going to blow everything wide open again. So I'm as a player, I'm really happy with the indie apocalypse.
So yeah, Dishonored 2 I'm excited about,
Dishonored 2.
And I've just seen they've put Star Citizen on here because Star Citizen's release date is still technically 2016, which is a great troll move by you, Eurogame.
Amazing. Right.
Yeah, so I'm going to leave you now.
Yes.
To finish off this podcast on your own.
All right. Well, that's great. Well, you have a nice time, and I will talk to you on this very podcast next week.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Right, well, as Ian departs, it's time for the top 10 UK Steam games, because in fact no games were released this week in 2006, according to Eurogamer. Not sure what happened there, January blues or something. But let's go for the top 10 UK Steam games. So at number 10, it's Tom Clancy's The Division, which is on pre-order. Number 9, it's Ark Survival Evolved, and you all know what we think about that. Number 8 is Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, a banner week for Tom Clancy IP holders. XCOM 2 is at number 7. I am very excited to check out XCOM 2. That's just a pre-order, so I shall wait for that to come out. Dungeons 2 at 75% off at number 6. Football Manager 2016, 25% off at number 5. Number 4 is Grand Theft Auto 5. Number 3 is Fallout 4. Number 2 is Counter-Strike Go. And number 1 is Rise of the Tomb Raider in pre-order. So not really a very interesting week. Now, Ian isn't here, so we can't do the television and film lounge area in a collaborative sense, but I would like to recommend you Making a Murderer, something that both Ian and I are watching at the moment, and I'm sure we'll discuss it a little bit later on when we've both finished watching it, so there'll be no spoilers. Basically, this has been presented as kind of a standard sort of true life crime thing, but it's so much more than that. It's 10 episodes long. Every episode is an hour, and it follows basically one individual who's involved with 2 different court cases, and everyone around him, his family, his different lawyers, the political implications of what happens to him. And it's really good because it allows you the time and space to really understand all the facts and events. A normal documentary about something like this would have to cut lots out, it would have to put things in a very difficult order, it would have to rush through things. And this gives you a lot of time, for example, watching trial footage of one of the trials, the chance to understand the machinations of a lot of the people involved. A very heavy component of this is how law enforcement build a case against someone, and it really allows you the space and time to do that. So Making a Murderer, which is on Netflix, a lot of people talking about it, which normally puts me off something, as you know, because I'm an appalling hipster, but in this case, it is fantastic. So that's the end of that, and now we shall move on to your listener questions. And the first one is from Dave Coleman, aka Cheshire, from last week, and he says, what's your worst playtesting experience? I think my worst playtesting experience probably would have to be running the single-player campaign of Frozen Synapse 1 loads and loads and loads of times, trying to find minor bugs with win and loss conditions in every level. We got right to the end of development on that, and I'd already done the gameplay testing on that, so I'd played through the campaign a lot of times, and then right at the end I was just grinding it to try and figure out if any missions broke, and I was getting Bin to do the same, and I remember that being particularly mentally taxing. So even though that's not sort of a funny story, it's a very difficult thing. I think any devs making single player games will understand that one. Andrew John Smith asks, what's your favourite user review of one of your own games? And I think that's probably from back in the day when Blues News was a thing, if anyone remembers that site, still going, I believe. We got a post about Determinants on there, which was an exciting thing. And there was one comment, and it just said, what is this shit? So that was a game where we'd spent basically 4 years working on it. It was our first game, and that was one of the first ever comments on it that was in the public domain. What is this shit? So that was an auspicious start. He also says, what foodstuff does the team most miss now the Christmas period is over? I think it's probably the devils on horseback, the little sausages with the bacon. Do miss those. I'd love some little devils on horseback to just come cantering into my life every day of the week. But then I would be a little sausage wrapped in bacon myself. So we don't want that. Captain Binky asks, what would you rather be or a wasp? And that's literally what he asked. The answer to that is a wasp. Chris Seabock asks, how many points does it take to change a vector? And the answer is 1. Andrew Roper asks, if you could be any type of potato, which would it be and why? Now, I don't roast potatoes that much. And so I'm going to have to go with a King Edward, mostly because that's the only type of potato I can remember, but also because it's one of the more versatile types of potato. And there was a slight shortage of those in my local Sainsbury's prior to Christmas, and I feel like they need some more, so I would be a King Edward. Skitanic Studios says, counter question, couch potato or potato couch? Now, I'm particularly interested in the idea of a potato couch. I think the soft, spongy, starchy basis for a couch could be really good. I think it could be both comfortable and supportive, so I'm going to go with potato couch. Luke Botham asks, and this is the final question you'll be pleased to hear, and it's a sensible question. If you could work from any location in the world, regardless of need for equipment, where would it be? Now, I think I'd probably go for, if I could sort of teleport there and back, somewhere in the Highlands of Scotland, because I do like the Highlands of Scotland, they're very beautiful and remote. More sanely, if I could live anywhere in the world, I would live in Vancouver, because I really love Vancouver. There's some really cool games people there, not to mention anything else. One of the best places for food in the world. Such good food in Vancouver. I have lots of nostalgic memories from living there when I was younger. I like wintry weather. I just love Vancouver, so it would be Vancouver. Right, I'm sure that was fascinating to everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this little personal annex with me at the end of the show. But Ian will be back, as I said, next week, as will I. Once again, thanks very much for your support of the show. It means a lot to us. If you would like to retweet it when I post the show, that would be awesome. We'd love to get some new listeners. If you don't follow me on Twitter, please do. I'm Mode7Games. Thank you and goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.